here, and he played for Carlisle, the Indian school, and he is arguably the greatest athlete who ever lived, male athlete. There are some female athletes who have a claim to that. But, you know, he played professional football for Canton, other teams. Played professional Major League Baseball. He won Olympic gold medals that were taken from him because they said he wasn't an amateur, and now you can be a pro, it doesn't matter. That was a shame. He weighed 202 pounds. He was considered big. He was a big man, but very fast. This is Larry Allen, who played for the Cowboys in the 90s. Again, not 320 pounds. Much bigger than that. He's a huge man, and he bench pressed 700 pounds, which is extraordinary. And I thought I'd play this for your amusement. I don't know if you saw this last week, but here's a high school kid who actually does weigh 320 pounds.
We have a surprise category. So stop. We got it. Stop. High school football last night. Have a look at this play. West Virginia, baby. The big man Scumbag, weighing in at 365. He's got the entire team on his back. Come on, big guy. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's at the 10.
So, yeah, that was Wheeling Park and John Marshall, and that kid basically carried the entire John Marshall team on his back. In the old days, he wouldn't have been allowed to play. They would have said, you're too big, because they would put the weight limits in the newspaper. They didn't want to be crushed. But, yeah, high school. Akeem Davis is his name. I was just watching college football game day, and it said Wheeling Park. Pretty cool. Here's some footage from the oldest American football. Oldest footage. Okay. Yes. Early on, they would have multiple, that's a good question. Very early, there could be as many as 25 guys out there on each side running around. It was mayhem. And of course, then it eventually was cut to 11. I think it was 15 for a while. But there's rugby has 15s and 11s and 7s. But so football was modeled on rugby, and they had basically chaos. You can see it kind of looks like rugby even then. But that's what it looked like. These guys, you can see the guy on the left is wearing his nose mask, but didn't look like it worked very well. May have actually exacerbated his injury if you look closely. So it became more and more violent, and I'll explain why. And so football was put on trial. President Roosevelt, who you saw there, is sometimes credited with helping to save American football. And that's kind of a myth. He sort of helped, but I'll explain. So one account of the Princeton-Yale game said they saw real fighting, savage blows that drew blood, and falls that seemed as if they must crack all the bones and drive the life from those who sustained them. Yeah, and you see some of the illustrations at the time, although cartoonish, were relatively accurate. Well, this guy here is losing a head. Not accurate, but arm flying off there, yeah. But it was that sort of whirlwind of battering ram type stuff. So by 1884, Princeton came up with something called the V trick. This is the V trick formation. It's one of the first mass momentum plays, so-called. So what they did was they create a wedge. There was no line of scrimmage that you had to line up on, so you could put guys back. Put the ball carrier in, this is sort of like rugby, like on a scrum, in the middle, and then you blow into one guy. Pick the weakest guy on the line and just destroy him. And that was called the V trick. That might remind you of a play that's used now.
And here comes the Eagles' specialty, the push. Just watch the push, watch the surge. It's a long way to go on the push, but it doesn't matter. They still get it.
In there, touchdown.
You do whatever you can, but whatever it is, it's not going to work.
Watch number 14, Kenneth Gainwell, come in and gets behind Jalen Hurts.
Again, you run that push play, and it's impossible to stop. Meanwhile, Hurts has been fantastic.
You've got a 6'1", 223-pound quarterback that squats 600 pounds. But look at the linemen, how low they go. And they just dive in there at the legs of the defensive lineman, and low man generally wins, and you've got to try to get underneath that, and then you've got the push from behind. Absolutely impossible to...
Yeah, the brotherly shove or the tush push. We think of it as something innovative and new. It goes all the way back to the 1800s. So what George Carlin said in jest, we saw in the clip, is accurate. This is a military strategy, right? The wedge. Napoleon used it to break through a line, and then the guys on the out would flank the line. So these strategies came from military strategies. Okay, and that brings us to the most dangerous play ever developed in football, and it's called the flying wedge. So you had the same thing as the V trick, only this time they're running first. And they're going to run in a wedge formation, usually on a kick, right into one player. And just, if he doesn't get out of the way, he's going to be killed. It's called the flying wedge. It looked something like this. Here's another illustration of it. You see the ball carrier there in the middle. Mass momentum, that's what it was called. And here's a humorous reenactment by Eli Manning. I never realized how funny the Manning brothers are, but I think they're pretty funny. Here it is. He's with an actual former Harvard player, Mr. Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Man, I wish I had that beard. It looks great with these uniforms.
It most certainly does not. I feel ridiculous. You think these were meant for the Glee Club?
Hey guys, y'all wanna play some football?
Hey, let's go, let's
Go
go.
this way. Have you ever heard of the flying wedge before? Hey guys, how would y'all like to demonstrate the deadliest play in football history? Yeah. Hey, put down that cheese wedge and help us demonstrate the flying wedge.
Great.
Let's go.
All right, guys. When we form our wedge, we need to attack the single weakest player on defense. Ready? Ready. Charge! Go! Hey, Eli. How do you like them apples?
Yeah, that was pretty accurate, though. I mean, that's what they did. And what was I going to say? Yeah, I think they're funny. But I had never seen that before, and thought I'd share it with you. Well, they had, okay, good question again, Mom. You're on a roll. They had him from the beginning. They had one guy, he was called an umpire, just like in baseball. And it was his job to monitor everything. But there weren't that many rules, so he would just let him play. Eventually, as the rules changed in the early 20th century, we'll see they had to have, a field judge and a line judge and a referee who's still called an umpire, the head guy. But at this time, it was just a slugfest. That's what they called it. This is 1905. You see the gentleman there on the right, he's using the heel of his hand because they outlawed the closed fist to try to stop the punching. And so they started hitting each other like karate, I guess. And, you can do as much, if not more, damage that way. So it was literally a brawl. It was a brawl. This is another variation of mass momentum play, which they called the turtleback. This is VMI in 1893. They create a semicircular push. This is a lot like the wedge, only they would come from behind and crash into the line, like flank the line. And there was another one called the push play, where they would pick up the ball runner and literally throw him over the line. I'm not making this up. I didn't know any of this either. So by 1905, it had gotten so bad, they called, the Chicago Tribune called it a death harvest. There were 19, we're not sure, different reports, 19 to 25 killed. Now, there weren't as many playing then as there are now, so the ratio is very high of players killed and like 300 seriously injured. This is a gentleman called Walter Camp from Harvard, and he came up with the rules. And he said there ain't going to be no forward pass, because in his mind, this was a manly game where we're trying our strength against strength, and if you start throwing that pass, it's going to take all the manliness out of the game. So he wouldn't allow it to happen. There were no helmets. This is in 1905. Pads or protective gear, very little padding. 5 yards for a first down, as I said, so you could keep getting a first down. It was easy. No neutral zone. Offense, that's why you could do those running plays. Players stayed on the field for up to 70 minutes. Sometimes the games would go on as long as 90 minutes, so they're exhausted. Offensive players would wedge themselves together, as I said, and bash their bodies like a rugby scrum. And in the mass pileups, there would be the punching and the kicking and the biting. Walter Camp dominated the rulemaking, and like I said, he didn't want the forward pass because it would take the roughness out. Does anyone recognize this gentleman? It's hard to recognize him here because he looks very different, but he was in a video earlier. Maybe you're right. It's this guy, Teddy Roosevelt, and he loved football, as you might imagine. He said, "No fellow's worth his salt if he minds an occasional bruise or cut." His own sons played, and one of them was badly injured one year around 1905, and he decided that, well, first of all, the Harvard president said that Roosevelt's attitude was the attitude of a ruffian and a bully. Well, that's Teddy Roosevelt. And so what Teddy did was put pressure on the presidents of Harvard and Yale and Princeton to come together and he called on his Navy secretary. Navy was starting to play ball, and they were a very good team as well. And the Navy guy was going to scare them all into making new rules. They had this summit in Washington, and so they did. They came up with some new rules that were passed by the Athletic Association eventually that would allow the forward pass. Here's the guy who threw the first one in Legal One. Bradbury Robinson was his name, and he threw it in 1906 at Carroll College in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So they opened up the game with the forward pass. You had to get 10 yards like we do now for a first down, so it's a little harder. They put a neutral zone in there so you can't cross over early or you'll be offsides or you'll be, in motion or whatever. And that helped save football. But by 1909, there were 26 killed. It wasn't working. So it's kind of a myth to say that he saved it. But what he did was create the momentum toward rules and rulemaking for safety. So this new group who met came up with the 20 most dangerous plays in football. And one of them at this time was the diving tackle. It looked like this. The guys would launch themselves in the air to make a tackle, and you could break your neck. You know how this goes. Others were the kickoff return, which remains one of the most dangerous plays, right? Because you got the guys flying down there, and they develop momentum, right? And they could get hurt. Striking with the knee. Concentrated and continuous attacking against one player, like poor Eli. You just beat the hell out of one guy so you can get him off the field. Intentional fouls, obvious. Using the heel of the hand, we saw that one. Throwing oneself under a mass of players. Yeah, so one way to defend the wedge, and the flying wedge, really the only way to defend it, Mr. Heffelfinger, remember him, the first pro? He came up with it. What you had to do, unlike Eli, who fell backwards, you had to fall sideways and roll so you create like you're a log and knock down the first few players. But you're sacrificing your own body to do it. It was the only thing that worked. Uneven matchups, which were quite common, as we'll see. Poor conditioning, still a problem. And exhaustion. Players were out there 70, 80, 90 minutes they didn't have substitutes really. They were allowed to have maybe one or two substitutes. So they were tired. And when you're tired, you get hurt. Here's a closer look at piling on a player who was crawling on the ground. So that's another thing they would do. They get a guy down. He had to say, "I'm down." And the referee had to hear it. If he didn't hear it, they continued to pile on, and it was legal. So here's this guy. He's saying, "Yeah, okay, I'm down. Yeah. And then I'm looking through when I'm doing this research, and I discovered the real football is a marketing machine, right? And they discovered that here in 1891. Because on the same page with football reports was one of the early Anheuser-Busch advertisements. So the association of football and beer was very early, and it was local too, these guys. You see Schmalbach beer for the brawny. Look up in the left corner there. Those are football players. And so whatever they put in it, they claim makes you stronger, like Guinness does. And so if you want to be like these manly football players, you will drink the Schmalbach beer. The first real game I mentioned earlier in Wheeling involved the red and white Wheeling gym team versus the purple. They kept this color, the lavender and black Martins Ferry YMCA team. So the YMCA had a lot to do with early football. This was the cheer they used. Hi-yi, YMCA, boom, die, rah, rah. That's actually in the paper. So, YMCA's are cracks. Yeah, the Farians came over to Wheeling. They played on the island, and Ferry won the game. I forget what the score, 20-0. So, Ferry was an early power, and this is an actual illustration from that game. They put him in the paper. See this, the Wheeling guys being tackled there, like 18 guys on top of him. And some more illustrations. Again, looking like rugby there on the left. And the tackle, at this point, you cannot go low. You have to tackle waist or up. In the first really good football squad, Sandlot football squad here in Wheeling, they were called the Tigers. And their founder was Edward Barrows, and he said, the people of Nail City are football crazy. So he created this team called the Tigers with 4 brothers. They were the Edwards brothers, and they were excellent football players. So these are illustrations in the paper. Again, you see the chrysanthemum hair, and that guy has one of those nose things on in his puffy pants. They played a game on Thanksgiving Day in 1896, defeating the Western Pennsylvania University. They played a university team, 11-6. And so here's a guy kicking, and I don't know what that is. This one says one kind of kick, so that's the umpire, Mom. He's giving him a penalty. The guy's like, what? He's enormous. I don't know. They weren't that big, but here's a tackle. Here's a touchdown, and here's a tackle. And here's one out. So they're carrying that guy off. These were in the newspaper, yeah, the Register, yeah. They had a lot of cartoon illustrators, and they did these football illustrations, which was pretty fun. They played in the mud. It was a $200 purse, and so they beat, this is a different year, but also the Wheeling Tigers. They beat the Pittsburgh Nonpareils, that was their name, 19-0. They started challenging all these Pennsylvania teams because they were that good. And then they were supposed to play the Vigilance of Martins Ferry, who were the good. Now, they went from YMCA to the Vigilant Firehouse. That was their sponsor at this point. And the game had to be called because of the enthusiastic rooters who encroached on the field and started tackling the players. The fans got involved, and so they never finished the game. We don't know who would have won. They had the Schmalbach, and they came on the field. Yeah. Now, in 1905, I think it was, yeah. No. 1899, sorry. The Tigers defeated Bethany College. So they would play, this is a Sandlot amateur football team, and they're playing college. And Bethany was pretty good back then. They would play WVU and other big schools, Washington, Jefferson, who were football powerhouses. But yeah, the Wheeling Tigers won it 12-6. And then they went away. That was it for them. But the next year, like I said, arguably the best team the Wheeling has ever had, Stats AC. Well, I saw this word stats. Does anyone know what it is? It's a German word. There was a newspaper called Staatszeitung here in Wheeling. It means state, okay? And so I figured, oh, it must be a German word. That makes sense. But actually, it was this guy, Dr. O.M. Stats, who funded the team and is credited with saving football. See, it says the man who kept football alive in Wheeling. And this is his coach. So you can see him actually in the Stats uniform there, which I think they were also red and white, which was the early Wheeling color for football. And they would play all college teams on their schedule. This is what the whole team looked like. I don't know how they did this. It's not a drawing, it's not a photograph, it's kind of in between. But you can see what one of them looks like there. Baker, the center. This is the center. He's maybe $130, I don't know. Little guy. In 1910, the newspaper congratulated them as the football champions of the Upper Ohio Valley. And that's when this started to be a claim. And this is their record. You can see they beat everyone except Waynesburg College, where they lost 6-0, and they lost to Belair 6-0. This report came out when begging. Dr. Stotts lost money, and I'll tell you why in a second. But they're saying, "Oh, please don't go away. The Stats is the best thing that's ever happened to Wheeling football. We need you back." But what happened was he was supposed to play WVU, believe it or not. They were going to play here in Wheeling against the Stats team, and they had a contract and everything. And then WVU backed out, and people locally were really upset. They had a contract. Dr. Stats was paying for all this stuff. And so they called him yellow. And they called him cowardly. And they said they were making excuses. One excuse was the players had to take their final exams. They didn't want to play football. And so people were really mad. It went on. It goes on. They called him, these are kindergarten school methods. This is a local Sandlot team calling West Virginia University for violating the contract. Disgraceful state of affairs. The people of Wheeling were disgusted with WVU. Now, we're all on the bandwagon, but man, I did not expect to see that. They called them like a number of street urchins, this talking about the players. So, yeah, it didn't happen. And guess what? Because they lost all that money, Stats went away. They folded. But taking back a step back to 1910, I mentioned earlier that Bethany would play WVU a lot. In fact, they never beat WVU, but this happened. This gentleman was named Rudolph Monk. Does anyone know this story? He played for WVU. He was their captain, and they were playing Bethany in Wheeling, and he was killed in the game. They said the Bethany player, who was essentially, his name was, I'll get to it in a minute, who they said was a mercenary player that they hired, just for this game, that he did it deliberately and killed this guy. So there's Monk, and this is the illustration that was in the paper, the tackler. He was arrested and charged with murder. Have you ever heard of anything like this? His name was McCoy, and there's his picture. And they could not prove, however, at his hearing, there was no evidence that he did do it intentionally, because the umpire, the referee, backtracked, who initially said he was sure it was an intentional hit, that he kicked him in the back of the head, and he took that back, and they said, well, we can't charge him with murder. And so they released him. And he never played football again. He was not as bad as they made him sound. I did some more reading about him, but he never played again. And WVU and Bethany suspended the rest of their season that year. I didn't know that happened. Did anyone know that? By the way, John Eric Gillot went to Bethany. I don't know what that has to do with this, but he didn't help me today. This gentleman's name is William Parker, and this is 1915. He was the captain of Wheeling High School, and he was killed in Buchanan. Brain concussion, they called it, a brain bleed. The the Buchanan High School student body passed a resolution proclaiming we profoundly deplore the tragic death of Captain Parker, extended their sympathy, and it was a huge deal here in Wheeling. This was the plaque that hung in the high school memorializing his. You've probably heard of this one, right? In any event, a year later, this young man, Robert Lee Ritz, and I wrote a story about this one. He was murdered, actually. He was also the captain of Wheeling after Parker. So if you want to read the whole story there, there's a lot more to it than what I'm saying, but he was murdered. So that Wheeling High School had a lot of tragedy here in the war years. And then in 1921, we get back to the Columbia Club, the Columbia Athletic Club. Okay, this is how it all started. And I heard from a gentleman, well, let me get to that in a second. First of all, this guy, his name is Halley. His name is Buck Halley. He is the uncle of Chuck Halley. He played on that team. And there's his obituary. This guy is Doobie Daler. And so I asked Mr. Daler if he didn't know if that was his dad or his grandfather. I think it must have been his grandfather. And does anyone know who this guy is? I'll give you a close-up picture in a minute. Here's the close-up picture. Looks a little bit like him. That's Warren Pugh. Anyone heard of this guy? He's the Wheeling Hall of Fame. He's most famous for being a referee, but that was him playing on the Columbia Club. And just to go back, because I forgot to mention, I received this guy down here at the bottom, an email from a gentleman named Jeffrey Downs. If you're watching today, Jeffrey, I promise you this. His grandfather, Clement Lineweber, his grandfather's first cousin, that's him. In the folklore, he said he had never seen it, but there's a picture of them. And this picture is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They sent it, Mr. Lineweber and Mr. Pugh, Warren Pugh, and they put it in the Hall of Fame. So it might be the only Wheeling football team that's in the Hall of Fame. But, yeah. So there you go, Mr. Davis. The Columbia Club was down on between 22nd and 21st Street on Market, so near St. Alphonsus. And the way this all started again was because of a man named George. His nickname was Happy Haverkamp. And on September 26, 1920, they were playing the Moundsville team, the Olympics they were called. And early the first half of the game, toward the end of the game, Mr. Haverkamp complained of a headache and said he'd been kicked in the head. He bumped his head. So they took him to the hospital down in Glendale, and they released him. He seemed fine. And then the next day, he was back in the hospital in North Wheeling, and they were saying he's in serious condition, he may die as a result of his injury, and then he did die, and that this is his obituary. So a very sad story, but again, the head injury in 1920, not a big surprise. Surprised it didn't happen more, actually. Columbia Club, the next year, so this would be the year they claimed to have won the Ohio Valley Championship. And as I told you, be careful of these claims. Here's an article I included because they beat Warwood 26-0. You can see their record here and their lineups. They were going to play the Yankees. Now, the Yankees were from East Wheeling, and they were the best team in Wheeling at the time. And so Columbia Club wanted to play them so that they could claim to be the best team. And they played, and they battled to the exciting 0-0 tie. So they said, oh, okay, but we played better, Columbia Club said. So we should be the champions. And I think that's where they stopped when they wrote that on their picture. But the fact is, they played them again. And so in the second game, Yankees won 13-0. So here's the little that's written on their picture. They were the Columbia Club. They were the champions. I hate to burst the bubble all these years later, but I think the Yankees were the champs of 1921. Columbia Club was very good runner-up. Very good. Well done. But they didn't win it. Here are these guys in 1979. That's Mr. Pugh on the left and Mr. Lineweber on the right, submitting the photo to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and it is there. You can see it there to this day. I wrote to the Pro Football Hall of Fame hoping, because they said John Eric said they also have Haverkamp's picture. I want a picture of Haverkamp, but they never wrote back. They never called. No, Pro Football Hall of Fame didn't call. 1922, moving on, there's the Yankees again. You can see their record, spotless. They pretty much beat everybody, including Columbia Club, twice. And then you see this challenge here to the Yankees to play them at League Park. These are called the X-Highs. So these are high school players who just wanted to keep playing football. They didn't go to college. They formed a team called the X-Highs in Martins Ferry, and they challenged the best team in Wheeling to this game, the Yankees. And they won. The X-Highs won 6-0. They beat the Yankees. So 23. Now, so there's so much here. I have to divide it into two parts. I'm not going to go beyond 1930 today. But just looking at 1927, they started calling it sandlot football. And they even had a gentleman named Bill Seidel, Jr., who was the Sandlot editor. So they had a Sandlot football editor for the paper. Here's some more things that I found of players being killed in the local area. This kid here had a fractured skull. And, yeah, it's terrible. But it was still going on. This is 38. 39, they have the plastic helmets. Still happening. That's a Navy football player. Here's one. The kid from Blair was running a play, and he ran into a horse. He wasn't killed, but he broke his collarbone. And so he lost to the horse, they said, 1943. 1945, married men versus single men in a football game on the gridiron. I don't know who won. I didn't look it up. And so these are just some of the team names. I thought they were fun. Warwood Eagles. You have East End Yankees. Talked about them. The Madisons from Island. The Spunky Points. Southside Trussels. Benwood Bearcats, also known as the Milltown 11. They were pretty good. Moundsville Olympics. The Mound City Eagles, the Shamrocks, Moundsville Shamrocks. Blair Knee-Highs, a lot of Blair teams. Blair Bulldogs, the Beginners, Triangle AC, Martins Ferry Vigilance, that's the fire department. The Bijou Billiards, obviously sponsored by a pool hall. The Martins Ferry Welsh Lads, I like that one. The Bauer Turners, remember the Bauer baseball team that played here in Fulton? Mrs. Bauer, she also had football. They were good. The Wheeling Mohawks. Help me out here. Sutton AC, South Wheeling. Blair Weenies. Capitals, Globes, Wheeling Tigers, Stats AC, and the X-Highs. That's an overview of the names. 1954, that's when Arnold Lazarus wrote that it's a mild form of massacre, which I quoted him at the beginning. And he's talking about these high school players who just can't give it up. And so they assemble even though people tell them not to. He talks about a game at Bridge Park where the ambulance made 2 trips. A Ohio fellow was wearing a baseball cap for a helmet. Now this is 1954, received a concussion. Of course he did. Another broke a leg. Other injuries were quite too numerous to list here. The game was finally concluded when the players heeded their own physical exhaustion, and so there you go. Now, I would be remiss, we're almost out of time, if I didn't include this little bit. Does anyone know who this team is? They are called the Hope Harveys, and they played some teams here locally. They played in Steubenville. Now you can recognize this gentleman. Does this help? Does that help? That was Art Rooney's team that eventually became the Steelers. So he started with a Sandlot team, and of course he played here in Wheeling for the Stogies with his brother Dan. And so the Hope Harveys, there's his brother Dan, there's his other brother, I can't remember his name, James maybe, and his little nephew was the mascot. And so he shifted from baseball to football, and this is what happened in the early 70s, and then this happened in the later 70s. And I'll conclude today with my favorite recent football video that you may have noticed on Sunday. I'm calling it the one-man flying wedge.
Jones the block at the left tackle. The muscular tight end Washington running roughshod, bulldozing, plowing. Wow! Catch and run. 31.
I'm going to say 270. I called him that earlier. That's a big man, and there's a stiff arm. There's a Derrick Henry for you. And then Geno Stone, you don't want any of that. Oh, Turner, you can try.
There you go. That concludes the program. Might have another one next year, all with the Ironman and all that. I don't know what I can answer, but I can try if there are any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know when the scoring changed?
That would have been around the same time as the other rule changes in 1909. The touchdown was only worth like 2 points, and there was no safety, and so they wanted to discourage teams from doing that block game. So they've created the safety. If you go in your own end zone, you lose 2 points, and you have to give the ball up. And then they figured out that the touchdown was a lot harder than kicking the ball through the goalpost, which you would get like 3 points for, like a field goal. So they would give you 6 points for the touchdown and then the bonus point. So that was about 1910. Hope Harveys were in Pittsburgh. They would come down and play occasionally, local teams. Yeah. Any others? All right, thanks for your attention. I forgot to say, go Steelers. Whoops.